It was only about 2 weeks since he left that my nephew came back. Normally, I'm lucky I see him once or twice a year, but now that he knows what I used to do, well, now I got his attention, and he's back. And just like everybody else, he begins to ask me about all the most well known cryptids and will not let go. It stands to reason after all. I mean, he is a teenager and that's what they know. When he was visiting, I caught him actually trying to sneak into my office, doesn't realize how well I have it secured. And when I asked him, "What the hell are you doing?" "I just wanted to read the files," he said. "You didn't ask, so no." He forgets that this is a simple rule in my house. If you want something, you've got to ask first. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to me. He insisted that he should be able to go read the files, so I insisted that he follow me outside and work. It was a long day after that of falling trees, cutting, splitting, stacking, and clearing up. Every once in a while, he would ask questions about different things I may or may not have known about. This was usually answered by a scream of confusion, as a chainsaw and or a splitter is really loud. So loud, in fact, that you have to wear hearing protection. So somebody coming up and trying to do some sort of small talk, yeah, that's a losing battle right off the bat. I did hope throughout the day that he would figure it out. By the end of the day, unfortunately, his child's wonder would not let it go. As we kept burning brush away, he kept posing questions to me, and eventually I snapped, telling him, "You tried to go behind my back. When I feel I can trust you again, then we can talk about my old side job." And just like all kids these days, he was always probing me with questions the next morning. I thought he had got it by then, but I was wrong. No matter how many times he asked me about things, I was quiet about all of it, as we decided to paint the shed and clean the gutters, and we had a whole bunch of other stuff to do. The coldness I gave him actually took almost the entire week that he was going to visit to sink into that thick brain of his. By the end of the 5th day, though, he had actually stopped asking. I let him stew in that for a day before I had him follow me to my office. He was actually grinning like an idiot when I unlocked the door in front of him, and because of that, being so giddy, he barely seemed to notice, if he did notice at all, the biometric system that released the other locks. When he decided to sneak in, he didn't realize he wasn't getting in anyway, without my thumbprint, my iris scan, and a visual cue on the facial recognition software. We walked into the office, and I told him, "Sit," and pointed right at the chair. While he did, I pulled one file out, and I dropped it right in front of him and began telling him about the first time I met a mosquito. That was what we called the vampires. It's a simple code name we give them. Actually, every cryptid has a code name, and it's something so simple that you wouldn't even think twice about it. I told him about back in the Dark Ages how vampires had much more prominence. The only information the public actually had to go on were rumors, which turned into legends and conjecture at best. And that was the way things were. Vampires did use this truly to their advantage. The majority of the quote-unquote rules that were made up about vampires themselves, the superior speed, ooh, they're so quick you can't see them. The superior strength, oh, they'll lift you up and throw you. The superior intelligence, they can outthink you before, they know the moves you're going to make before you make them. Oh, all that shit was made to intimidate. And that's it. On the opposite side, they use the disinformation about it cannot enter a home without permission. That was simply used to get people to let their guard down so they could sneak in. Most vampires are very, very light on their feet, so unless you have excessively creaky boards, yeah, they're going to get in, and they're going to get the blood they need, and they don't need that much. Eventually, though, the truth came out, and the nephew was flipping through the pages as I spoke. I told him, the truth is, vampires are actually partly ethereal, not of physical means. This confused him, so I simply had to point to the part in the file. It showed how they have a weakness to the Word of God, and this breaks them down. Their ethereal portion actually doesn't actually break away, it shuts down. There's a big difference. This is why prayers weaken them so much, but it is not going to kill them because the physical portion of their body is still working. You see, for them, the ethereal and the physical work in tandem. You can't kill them unless you take care of both, but there's ways to do that. Silver is something they hate. They hate the whole idea of it's going to send them bursting into flames. Nah, it burns like hell. But that's simply because silver is a purifying agent. It always has been. And it can actually purge the contagion from their system. Yes, there is an actual contagion. That's the physical portion that gives them their extra abilities. It won't kill them on its own, because again, you have to get both sections, but it will make things very uncomfortable. Think of having your own version of a third-degree burn mixed in with some sort of allergic reaction. Just extremely, extremely uncomfortable. At this point, I had to flip a few pages so he knew what the hell I was talking about, as he looked down and there were words on the contagion that the vampires have. The contagion they have is strictly blood-based and blood-borne. It cannot travel through the air. It dies in water, which is the whole thing about vampires don't like water. And you can't become a vampire from a simple bite. At that point, I reached up and I pulled down the shoulder of my shirt to show where one had tried to take my deltoid muscle clean off. A little fucker got on me good, too. I threw him to the ground and took care of his ass. I told him that vampires can only be produced by two means. By standard mating, but only vampire to vampire. It doesn't work vampire to human, no matter how many times you try. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to try. But there's the other way of transfusing enough blood. Usually you have to drain the body of enough blood that they get them right on the edge of death from loss of blood. And then you have to refill them with vampire blood, straight from the tap. This is potentially lethal on both ends when you do this, and the transformation is not exactly fun. I've seen it happen one time. It was not something I ever want to see again. They were just screaming like their insides were trying to become their outsides. Their outsides were trying to come inside, while something was trying to drive a telephone pole up their ass while crushing their head down into their spine at the same time. The way they moved and twisted and everything jerked, it was just horrible. Think of the absolute worst seizure you've ever seen in your life, and think that was just somebody with a little case of ugh. No, this was much worse. This is when my nephew stopped me and asked what partially ethereal truly meant. I had to tell him about how beyond the confines of the physical plane is what ethereal means. And with this, it gives the vampires a very heightened awareness of living things, which is the idea that they can actually see in the dark. Do they have better night vision than us? Sure, but not that good. The fact of the matter is, when they're running through the woods, they can see the living trees. They can see the living grass. They can definitely see anybody running through it. This is why it's almost impossible to catch them if they take off into the night and you don't have night vision. However, if they are cut away from this ethereal ability, it's like losing one of their senses. Many times they drop and scream, and you would too, I told him. Once it was discovered that the vampires do not have all these extra powers they claim to have, and the way Hollywood loves to portray these sparkly little morons, we realized it was very easy to deal with one. However, vampires realized this too, so it became something of a non-issue. They originally wanted dominance, but that was during the medieval period. Then they went into hiding, and when they finally came back out a few times throughout history, they decided to try their old ways. Now, they're into their new ways, which is pretty much just living. However, there are a few that just cannot break away. Reason being, I should say primary reason, is that when a vampire feeds, they get intoxicated. And I mean shit-faced, hammered, drunk on just a couple shots worth of blood. It is crazy to see it. What used to happen is, just like with an alcoholic, they just can't seem to stop. They have a little bit and they need more and more and more. Eventually, they will become an addict, and that's when they kill. And they kill often and brutally, and they get very, very sloppy. Mainly because they're so freaking drunk they can't even stand up straight half the time. I mean, usually it's very difficult to sneak up on one of these things. They can always see you coming. They don't just hear your heartbeat, they can actually physically see every living part of you moving at the same time. However, drunk vampires are just, well, you just walk right up to them. They look at you, and just like any drunk idiot, they look at you, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Usually licking their fangs, trying to look intimidating. At that point, things just end quick. This is why vampire hunting doesn't actually pay well at all. Any idiot can just walk up and put a bullet right through their heart. This is where my nephew jumped in. It's that easy? Don't you need a stake? At that point, I chuckled. I know it's an old joke, but I just can't help but chuckle on that. All you need to do is damage the heart enough. You don't even need to just pierce it. A bullet hits with enough force to liquefy the heart. You know this. You've gone hunting before. All you gotta do is aim for the heart. All the other parts can regenerate just fine. Even the brain if you just hit that. This is why you put 2 in the heart, 1 in the head, just to be sure. Looking at him straight to his eyes, I said, where do you think that came from? The only trouble is if the vampires are hunting in groups. This is very rare. They are very solitary folks. Most vampires that you come across are folks that live by themselves, hang out at the bar every once in a while. They don't really bother anybody too much. They just kind of want to go and do their thing. But they don't want to be around people a lot. It's just a weird thing. For them, being alone is their security. It's weird. Aren't they all dangerous? All men are dangerous, I told him. The majority of them, like I said before, just want to live their immortal lives in peace. And yes, they are immortal. Their ethereal portion keeps regenerating the physical portion, and the physical portion supports the ethereal. But they're not all bad. It's just they're easy to scare people. I mean, hell, I worked with a pair of these guys. I mean, they were total pricks, but I worked with them when we took out the heads. I mean, a whole nest of them, too. This is when my nephew turned sideways. I said, no, don't. That's a whole nother file. We're on this now. I'm not pulling anything else out. I pointed him back to the file before we continued. I told him the interesting part is that vampires actually don't require blood. They can get what they need from almost any bodily fluid except for waste. Blood's just the most efficient, and that's it. I mean, because of that, you don't know if you're dealing with a vampire if you find anyone who decides to swallow too greedily. Hell, Liana, when I worked with her, she found a vampire this way. My nephew looked at me with the strangest look. I was like, really? He then started laughing, and we both did. We got a couple of chuckles before we continued. After my speech, the nephew read the file, and I retrieved a couple items while he did so. I handed over a belt buckle, a very large, dense belt buckle, and a chain, a silver chain with a cross. I told him before his little excursion with his friends, he's going to equip himself with these. I didn't tell him right then, but the silver cross was to make sure anything ethereal decides to back away unless it wants to play nice. And the belt buckle has some electronics to make our, shall we say, interstellar friends just leave him alone. He asked me why I was giving this to him, and I just simply said, you're still going to Mount Shasta with your friends, right? These will protect you. What about vampires near the mountain? He asked me. I simply responded, no, they're not there. They fear it too. Actually, they fear it more than we do. The realization that even immortals can be afraid of this area gave him complete pause as his eyes got really wide and his jaw just about struck the chair. When we were done there, I put the file away and walked out. Do I have to worry about getting attacked by a vampire around here? I didn't even look at him as I replied, They don't live around here. Besides, they're still fragile as any human. Just fight back. Most are cowards anyway. He actually paused and looked at me. I could see that the fighting against what he's seen in those movies and what I was telling him was just breaking his brain at that point. I continued with, They're just like any other bully. They're gonna come at you, and they're gonna look all big and bad. They're gonna flash their teeth, open their hands. Don't worry about the claws, because if you look close, those are just very well manicured nails. They do that. They've done that since the Middle Ages as a sign of dominance and to scare people, to make it seem like they're more animal than they actually are. But there's really not much there. I mean, think of a peacock. A peacock is this tiny, tiny little bird, but that tail and the big cry makes it look huge. So all I have to do is stand up to them and, again, show them your willingness to fight back. If they jump on you, just start wailing and don't stop. And trust me, what's going to happen the same thing that happened to this little fucker who tried to take me on, as I rubbed the scar on my shoulder, is they run away like scared little bitches. He grinned at that, and walking up the stairs, he says, Wait, you were bit. Aren't you afraid of changing into one of them even a little bit? I simply responded, They're not zombies. Well, if that's the case, I got a question. What? What would happen if a zombie bites a vampire, or a vampire bites a zombie? Oh, not this shit again. Hey everybody, it's Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on this hopefully occasional series I want to continue on. Before I leave, I need to send out a big thank you to one of my channel supporters, and that would be Erica Gem. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Everyone else, I'll catch you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.